Hi folks, I just released a video about installing a handrail in an outside porch area that led down into a basement. That was one I purchased at a big box store. If you haven't watched that one, after this you might want to go catch that other video. I'll put a link to it in the description. This is basically showing you the prep work that went into that to get the handrail ready. For example, we're going to put a return on the edge of the handrail so that it meets code. Stick around and let's learn together.
The first thing we had to do was go out to the job site and figure out how long that handrail needed to be. And we came up with 106 inches.
So 106.
Now that we know what our length needs to be, we go back to the shop and we start working on the handrail. Now this is something I bought at a big box store. It's a standard handrail you can buy off the shelf. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to do a lot of sanding. But don't worry, I'm not showing all the sanding to you, just some highlights so you can get a flavor for it. Now the sander that I'm using has a soft pad on it, which helps me get around some of the profile there and not flatten the round part. But this is kind of mushroom shaped, so there is a part on the bottom that has a little flat area, and I don't want to mess up that area, so I'm going to use a hand sponge sander to get some of that, and that's what I'm doing here. Now I do take this down to 120 grit. I'm not trying to make it smooth as glass. It's a handrail. You don't want it to be slippery.
This handrail is 144 inches. I only need 106 inches, but I need to leave a little bit on both ends. That way I can have some little returns on the side to meet code. You'll see that in just a minute. I'm going to measure the 106 inches that I need from the tip of the 45-degree angle that I just cut off. And of course, it's important to make sure you have your two 45-degree angles oriented correctly. Well, so far we have not been overly concerned with math in this project. We do have the overall length of the handrail, which was 106 inches, and that's measured from tip to tip with those two 45-degree angles that cut on the ends. There is other math we do need to be concerned with though, and I always recommend you check your local code, get with a professional if you need to, but make sure you do any work like this within code standards. Now there are some generally accepted numbers, but again, check your local code. One of the important things to consider is nowadays you have to have a return on the end of your handrail, and that's why we did that 45-degree angle. I can remember the old days at the top of the stairs, you just had a blunt end to the handrail and you never had an issue with it. But it is actually dangerous. You could catch an article of clothing on it, perhaps you're carrying a purse, or you just catch your arm on it as you're rounding that corner and you're starting to go down the stairs. Then you could take a tumble from that. So the code dictates now that you have a return so that it's harder to catch things on that edge as you're going down the stairs. Hopefully a controlled descent versus a tumble. You might recall that when I cut this rail, I cut material off both ends to create my 45-degree angles. And the reason for that is I wanted some excess material that I could take from one end, flip it around, bring it to the other end, and have a 45-degree match so that I could create my return. So that's what we're going to do on both ends. Now again, we're going to follow the codes and make sure we're within standards in my local area at least. So there are several measurements we care about at this moment for me to create this return. The first is the distance from the wall to the inside of the handrail needs to be at least 1.5 inches. So if this were the imaginary wall, this distance right here needs to be at least 1.5 inches. And that's so if you're walking down here and you're trying to grab onto it, you can get your fingers through there and not hit the wall. It'll be easy to grab onto. But the catch is the distance from this outer part of the handrail to the wall can be no more than 4.5 inches. So you have to work within those parameters. Now some of that would have to do with the width of your handrail. But with this handrail here, just a stock that I bought at a big box store, we should be able to get away with this and get what we need out of it. Let's take a look at those measurements and how they work out. If I put this piece up to basically where it's going to go, I'm going to measure back just a hair over 1.5 inches. and I'm going to mark that. Now I'm going to measure from this end of the handrail back to that mark, and that's about 3 7/8. So we're within our standards because we need to be within 4.5 inches from this point to the outer edge. Now that I know that, it's going to be the same on the other side. I can set up a stop on my table saw sled, and we can cut this off, and then we can cut the other piece off too.
So while I set up this stop block, I have a confession to make. I actually messed this up. I should not have made this cut right here until I finished doing my joinery so that I had more material to work with, and then come back and done this. And in fact, that's what I actually did, but I'm going ahead and showing you where I made the cut for length. Just know that the finished product came from after I did the joinery, which you're about to see in a few moments. And though you didn't see me do it the second time, it looked exactly like this time. So I make those cuts and they turn out well, both times actually. And being able to repeat with the table saw sled and the stop block sure is nice. Now I did cut these a little over the 1.5 inches, but that was intentional. We got quite a bit of variance we can work with here, and I just wanted a little room for comfort. So it's just a hair over that 1.5 inches. And there we go. We end up with 2 identical pieces. Actually 4, because I did this twice.
Using the table saw with that sled really made cutting these easy. Get a nice clean cut, and we're ready to attach this. The question then is, how are we going to attach this? Now we have a couple options. The most straightforward, and what's done on a lot of job sites, is basically just to put some glue on here, line it up, and take a couple brad nails, put them in from the end or in an angle, and let the glue dry, and you're all set. And that's a decent way to do it. If you're going to glue it without using the brad nails, you might have to clamp it. That can be a little more difficult. You're going to have some kind of cauls or something on there to where you can clamp this 45-degree angle. Now a step up from that would be to use some type of dowel jig. Basically, you would use a jig to drill the dowel holes and use some type of dowels, probably shorter than these that I have here, into here and attach the 2 pieces, which would create a nice strong joint and help everything line up. Now there is a third option if you happen to have one. Not everybody does. It's a very expensive tool, and for a lot of people there's absolutely no reason to have one, but that is the Festool Domino cutter. I know there's a lot of negative feelings out there to dominoes, probably because of the price, and obviously not everybody has one of these. If you do a lot of joinery, they are incredible, but you definitely do not have to have one. You can use dowels, glue, you can do mortise and tenon if you want to take the time to do that. That's some quality craftsmanship right there. More power to you. One day I'll probably work on some of those, but for right now, for the builds that I do, the domino does the job for me. So please don't be a hater. We would use these floating tenons, or as they call them, dominoes. Basically, we're going to bore a hole into it and then use these to attach the end. We'll put some glue on there and we'll be able to clamp that up and let that dry, and that'll be really secure. The thing I like about these floating tenons is it's going to help align our piece and keep it in place as we work. So the first thing we need to do if we're using the domino is do the domino layout. And that would be very similar if we were to use a dowel. You'd have to do a layout for that and figure out where you want everything. In this particular case, I do need to be exact though, because I would like to use what's called the tight setting. Both ends of the domino hole are going to be very snug on the domino. What that means is if I'm off when I drill that particular hole for the domino, then the pieces aren't going to align correctly. So that would be a bad thing. It's not that hard of a process to do on here. It's just something you need to be conscious of. There are other settings to where you can have a looser setting, basically, and it would give you a little bit of slop so that one end is tight and the other end gives you the ability to micro adjust a little bit. But I'd really like this to be a tight fit. And if you do everything correctly, that will work. So what I need to do is make sure these 2 pieces are aligned exactly where I want them. We're then going to have to make a reference mark, and that's going to be at a 45-degree angle. So the most important thing is to get this piece exactly where I want it. And then in about the middle, I'm going to make my mark. Okay. And so now when I go to drill for the domino, I use these 2 reference marks. I'm going to flip over and do the same thing on the other end. Now that we've got our 45-degree mark on here, we need to decide what size domino we want. Now this particular domino that I have goes from 4mm to 10mm. There is a DS700 model that goes even bigger than that for bigger pieces of furniture. Now I use these 10mm dominoes, the fairly large ones, for building even this workbench that I'm working on. I've been real happy with it so far. Of course, in a case like that, I used more than 1 per joint. I used at least 2 per joint. This particular application though, I'm just going to use 1 domino. Now they do range in size. I'm going to use one of these smaller, not the smallest one.
Now we're ready to go over and cut our domino mortises. So I'm going to line up that line with that little line and the gauge there. You can see it straight down. Keeping the unit very flat, I'm going to push forward very, very slowly to make this cut. You can see it starts going in there. Maybe a little change in sound, but it should be nice and smooth as it goes in. Now this is a rounded handrail with a flat bottom to it, so try to pick a flat reference point to work off of. I was able to get this to work, but it was a little tricky. And as you look down in there, you see that ovalish hole. That's where the domino will go. Now you'll notice that the stock I'm working with is longer than those little pieces I cut off. This is where I was talking about I had to go back and redo that part. So in order to have something to clamp this with, I had to use the remnants of that end piece to make these and then recut them down to that 1.5-inch piece that you saw earlier. So the moral of this story is, if you're going to do this kind of joinery or perhaps dowels, go ahead and do that work ahead of time before you cut it down to the final length. Now the final step of these cuts is to do the actual handrail itself. So I just go through and do both ends following the same basic procedure. And because we're using those common reference points, that pencil mark we made, these holes should line up perfectly when we go to put the 2 ends together.
Now whenever you're working with dominoes, it's usually a good idea to go ahead and dry fit everything first, because once you put these in here with glue, you're not getting them out. So you want to make sure everything lines up properly. A couple things you're going to want possibly is like a mallet. Okay, now that we have that, we can take our other piece and insert it. And if you got everything nice and straight, that's going to go together and give you a nice joint, which this is looking pretty good. The other thing you're going to want when working with dominoes is a good pair of pliers, because when you go to remove these dry fit pieces, they can be really tight in there.
Well, after knocking my tools almost off the table, I decided to do some glue up. So I took the glue and applied it to the end of the handrail, and then generously applied it to the domino itself and slid that in there. Make sure I slathered it around with the finger there, and then turn my attention to the other end, the return there, and gonna put some glue on there. And of course, I'm going to make sure I put some inside the slot itself for the other end of the domino. And we have a pretty nice tight fit there. I am going to take a clamp and go ahead and put a little bit of pressure on that until it sets up overnight. Now, you don't want to put a whole lot of pressure on there. Don't need it. And you're going to want to make sure you get that centered on there. Now, here's one of the nice things about the domino. Because it holds the wood in place, I can do this 45-degree clamping. That's much harder to do without the domino in there, or a dowel if you prefer.
Well, it's the next day, and we're going to take a look at how the glue up went. Just looking right at it here, it appears to be okay. Let's take the clamp off. Yep, that turned out pretty well. We're just going to do a little bit of light sanding now, and we'll be ready to put a finish on this.
This is mostly to clean up the glue and hit any high spots where maybe the handrail did not align perfectly. I also took this opportunity to hit that outside corner where the 45 meets. That's actually a sharp corner, and you wouldn't want to hit it with your hand as you go around that corner and go to grab it. Then I repeated the process for the other end. And then I even put my clamps back up. That's impressive. Having that wall helps.
Now our next step is to get the finish put on the handrail. Now I am going to use one of my favorite finishes, which is the half and half by Milk Paint. This is a citrus and tung oil blend. It does have some protection against water. Now this handrail is going to be on an outside porch. It is covered, but a little bit of rain could blow in on it. So that tung oil I think will be a good choice for this. My biggest problem is probably going to be keeping Shopcat away from this so that his hair doesn't get stuck in it. Yeah, baby. I think I'll start on this end. And I would note that these little chicken salad bowls or any type of little bowl like this, when you're finished with them in the kitchen, they're good for this type of thing. And if you keep the lid, you can even seal it back. Now I did wipe this down to get the dust off of it after that last sanding. This part is often one of my favorite parts of any project. You get to see that wood grain and how nice it's going to look come through. That end grain will take a little bit of extra. Now, this is not the fine finish you'd find on some fine pieces of furniture, and I'd be interested to hear about any of your finishing techniques. Obviously, I'm going way too fast here for normal with the sponge brush. You could introduce bubbles, but with this type of finish, the way it soaks in, and the fact that we're going to do a little light sanding on in between, this will be perfectly fine. It's a little bit more forgiving than some of your other finishes.
And as you can see here, that grain is starting to pop. It's going to look really nice once it's done.
Because I kept the lid to this, I can go ahead and put it on here and just make sure it keeps it fresh. And then I'll wait about 15 minutes or so, make sure it is pretty much dry to the touch. Do a little bit of wiping with a cloth, and then I'll flip it over and do the other side, and we should be fine with that. Like most oil finishes, you do want to be careful and make sure you have ventilation using these things. It does have a strong odor to it. Now, it's not an entirely unpleasant odor, it's just really strong. It's 50% citrus and it smells kind of orangey in here right now because of this, but you still want to keep fresh air going. All right, it's been about 15 minutes. This is dried in and it's actually very smooth as it is. We'll go ahead and flip it and apply the finish to the other side now.
I'll finish this off camera, but I am putting that coat there and it's starting to look really, really nice.
I do have this small sponge sanding block. Don't even know what the grit on this is, but it's very, very fine. It's at least like a 220. I'm just going to very, very lightly go over this just to take out anything that may have raised because of the moisture that's in the finish. I'm not trying to take it down or anything like that or strip anything off. I just want to get those nubbies.
And this process, as you can see, goes fairly quick. Well, it wasn't really that quick, but I'm just doing a real light sanding here. And then once I do that, I come back with a rag and I wipe it down, getting ready for the next coat of finish. Now, I'm not going to show any more of that work on camera, but I ended up doing 5 coats on this thing. If you're liking the content of these videos, I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. So once that finish had set up a bit, we took it over to the job site and my dad and I installed the handrail. Now I do hope you watched that other video that goes into detail about that, but a little bit of a spoiler alert, I think it turned out pretty well. Thanks for watching.